Hasib Drabu has also joined in. Hasib, 1 year to go before election, a lot of people worry that a budget could have been populist. But there were no great signs of populism as such. I mean, no great plethora of social schemes, etc. The government seems to be keeping its eye on investment and capex like it has over the last couple of years. Did that pleasantly surprise you?
Yes, in fact, more than that, because whatever freebies have been announced, like this, underwriting the consumption of the poor, are well designed and do impact the overall macro strategy underlying the budget. Because what you're trying to do by underwriting consumption of the poor, you are increasing disposable incomes, and you're doing a similar thing for the middle class as well because of the tax rebates, and also undertaking capital expenditure to generate demand. So even though there is some freebies are there, which, I mean, budget at the end of the day is a political document and you have to face the realities of an election, the fact remains that whatever freebies are have a certain economic logic in the context in which we are operating. So we are trying to rely on home market demand more than the external demand, because in face of an impending recession happening globally, this seems to be a wise way of managing the expenditure allocations within the budget.
Okay. Vinayak, the real excitement in the budget for a lot of people was that jump in the capex outlay from 7.5 to 10 lakh crores. But Subhash Chandra Garg was just telling me that, if you look at it closely, many thousands of crores out of that additional 2.5 lakh crores is actually money going into BPCL or the OMCs, going into BSNL, and actually a large part of it is substituting the funds which could have been raised from the market by government institutions like NHAI and IRFC, who are unable to access capital from the market, and therefore government is putting equity in them. So do you see 2.5 lakh crores of additional stimulus on the capex front, or do you think the numbers are actually not as much as the headline would suggest?
No. I think the numbers are as exciting as the headlines suggest. I greatly admire the consistency of this government year after year in using infrastructure spends as the pump primer of economic growth. In fact, very clearly last year after the budget discussions on a similar TV panel, I heard one of the chief bureaucratic mandarins of the finance ministry give me a very interesting statistic, which had been confidentially, shall we say, doing the rounds of the finance ministry, that 1 rupee spent in direct benefit transfer results in 0.9 rupees or 90 paisa of GDP, whereas 1 rupee spent in public works or infrastructure results in 3 rupees of GDP. So if this is the governing mantra, the government has been very consistent. So far as the point you made about Mr. Subhash Garg, I am completely confused, so I don't want to comment on it, except that every year such similar things happen where monies come in from privatization or is made available to PSUs. It happens every year. So if it happens every year, then you're comparing apples to apples, and I'm comparing 7.5 lakhs to 10 lakh crores, which is a whopping 33% increase over the 35% increase last year, with remarkable consistency. I also like the change in focus. If you realize, if you've seen this budget, it very interestingly shifts focus from roads to railways. In fact, I just noticed that this is the first finance minister's speech in 20 years that does not have the word roads in the budget speech. And it has a special emphasis on railways. So that as a nation, we recognize the fact that roads, after a quarter century of development, have reached a level of maturity which is a carry-on business of building roads, whereas railways is a new focus area. Urban infrastructure is the new focus area. So I think the broad numbers are well within the direction that national goals suggest, including the emphasis on urban infrastructure, on green energy, etc., etc. So I'm pretty happy with the logic, the structure, and the way infrastructure spends have been allocated. Over to you.
Naina, yet the problem remains that private sector capex has not been drawn in to the extent that the government would have wanted. I mean, year after year we hear the same thing, that there are some green shoots, but private sector capex is still not kicking in with the same enthusiasm that the government is going about its capex business. Why is that the case, and when do you see a change in that?
I think the economic survey uses a great word, incipient private sector investment. So obviously there are some green shoots emerging there, which is good. And in fact, a FICCI survey of 110 CEOs suggested that many were up at the sort of 70% capacity utilization, and about 25% were actually going to look at investing further this coming year, which is refreshing, frankly. So as I think what you see here is the government can't push the private sector, it can only cajole. Many companies have come out of COVID quite shaken, still writing down debt and looking at the MSME sectors. We are seeing, I think, a recovery evident from the credit growth, which was reported from Jan to November at a 30% increase, which suggests that MSMEs are in fact healthy enough to receive money from the banks, and also that the banks are opening their purse strings to MSMEs. So with MSMEs coming back into play, with the kind of confidence which is returning into companies, I think private sector investment goes up. But I do believe it is in recognition of the fact that this is not happening in a hurry, that government is saying, hey, we're going to step in, we're going to spend the money, make sure that we are providing that impetus to growth, giving the private sector a chance to step in. And for every penny, to Vinayak's point, and who better than him to tell us this, that for every penny that is going into infrastructure, logistics costs come down. And as logistics costs come down, our somewhat more expensive logistic costs vis-a-vis other countries helps the private sector to compete, to export, to bring prices down, to move goods faster, and that multiplier effect is huge. So I think it's really more a sequencing. In looking at private sector investment, you have to also include foreign direct investment now. We are seeing, I think, very exciting development with the way Apple has embraced India, $1 billion in December, bringing with them their own supply chain, some Chinese, some otherwise, to set up shop in India. And it is exactly this sort of trend that we need, where manufacture in India by companies which are really very, very quality focused. And they're doing this for the Indian market, they're doing this for export. So what we're producing in the country has to compete, has to have absolutely that top quality. And indeed, I do believe we're passing the test. So we will see more of this. Companies that have watched the Apple experience but will jump in. And the budget, by the way, talks about electricals, electrical goods, electronics, and diamonds, and some of the focus in these sort of markets and products.